Imagine, just for a moment, waking up one morning to find that the world you once knew, the life you thought you were building, is slipping through your fingers. You open your eyes and the weight of the day immediately settles over you. Your job, the one you worked so hard to get, is now on the line, dangling by a thread. Your relationships, the very people you leaned on, are fraying at the edges. Conversations that once were filled with love and laughter now feel cold and distant. You try to cling to the idea of hope, but every step you take feels heavier, as though the world is pushing you down. And your dreams, the ones that once felt so close, are now miles away. They're obscured by a cloud of uncertainty, doubt, and fear. But then, in the midst of this storm, there's something, a flicker of light, a voice deep inside you, faint but persistent, whispering, "Keep going." It's almost like it's coming from a place deep within your soul, urging you to push past the chaos and find a way forward. The world may be crashing down around you, but that voice won't let you give up. The question is, will you listen? Will you hold on long enough to find out if that voice is right? Will you trust it when everything else seems to be falling apart? This is a story of someone who faced the impossible. A story about a woman who stumbled in the dark, but found the strength she never knew she had. Her journey wasn't easy, and neither is yours. But the story of how she found her way might just be the story you need to hear right now. Our story begins with a woman named Emily. She was, on the surface, just like anyone else, chasing her dreams, believing in the power of hard work, and doing everything she could to build the life she wanted. For years, Emily had followed the rules of success. She worked tirelessly, took on every challenge that came her way, and built a life that she thought was secure. She had a small but cozy apartment, a job that gave her a sense of purpose, and a tight-knit group of friends who supported her. But life has a way of turning everything upside down when you least expect it. One by one, things started to unravel. Her job, the one she had worked so hard to get, began to feel more like a cage than a place of security. The hours were long, the stress was overwhelming, and every day felt like she was walking on a tightrope, waiting for something to snap. At first, Emily thought it was just a rough patch. A few tough months, some unforeseen challenges. But when the company began making cutbacks, when her colleagues were laid off, and when her own position was put under review, Emily's world shifted. It wasn't just about the job anymore, it was about everything she had worked so hard to build starting to crumble. And as if that wasn't enough, her family faced a financial crisis. Emily's parents, once financially stable, were now struggling to keep up with mounting bills. Emily had always been the strong one, the one they relied on for support. But now, she found herself unsure of how she could help them. Her relationships, too, were strained. Her closest friends, once a source of joy, were becoming distant. Arguments that had once been fleeting now lingered, and the connection she felt with her loved ones seemed to fade with each passing day. Emily was caught in a storm, unsure of where the next gust of wind would blow her. The future, once so bright with promise, now seemed uncertain and distant. She couldn't see the way forward, all she could see were obstacles. And for the first time in her life, she felt small, powerless, and afraid. Emily had a choice. She could let the weight of everything crush her. She could let despair take root and surrender to the overwhelming fear. Or, she could find a way to rise above it. She could learn to face the storm, not as a victim, but as someone who had the power to control her own fate. But in that moment, it wasn't clear what the right choice was. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, they all made it hard to see anything but the darkness ahead. She stood at a crossroads, and every step she took felt like it was leading her further into the unknown. The fear of failing, the fear of losing everything, paralyzed her. But there was something else, too. Something that kept nudging her, urging her to keep moving, even when she didn't know where to go. It was that voice inside her, the voice that whispered through the storm. It was faint, almost drowned out by the chaos around her, but it was there. It said, "You are stronger than this. You have more strength inside you than you realize." But could she trust that voice? Could she find the courage to listen to it when everything around her was falling apart? As the days wore on, Emily found herself torn between two paths. One was filled with the weight of fear and the comforting embrace of giving up. The other, it was unknown. It was filled with the uncertainty of fighting back against everything that seemed to be working against her. But how could she find the strength to walk that path? Was it even possible for someone like her to rise above it all, or was she doomed to sink under the pressure? She had no answers, only the nagging feeling that she couldn't keep going like this. But every time she felt like she might fall, that voice would rise again. And slowly, it began to grow louder. But there was a catch. Emily knew that to listen to that voice, she would have to let go of everything she thought she knew. She would have to let go of the idea that life should be easy, that things should fall into place without too much struggle. And the truth was, Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to give up that illusion. What if everything she had worked for was about to be ripped away? What if she wasn't strong enough? And yet, as each day passed, Emily felt the pressure building. She had no choice but to decide, would she let life defeat her, or would she rise? The clock was ticking, and the storm showed no sign of easing up. The question was, what would she do next? In those dark days, Emily's thoughts were consumed by doubt. The weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders every single morning, and with each sunrise, it felt as though the burden grew heavier. The bills, mountains of them, piled up on her kitchen counter, a relentless reminder that no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't outrun the financial strain. Each envelope that came through the door seemed like an indictment. And the phone calls, those late-night calls from her family, desperate and filled with worry, reminded her of how much everyone was counting on her. But Emily wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. The exhaustion was starting to wear down her resolve. Every night, she would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking herself, "Why me?" The question swirled in her mind like a storm, impossible to escape. Why does it always feel like things are falling apart? Why does it feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough? How much longer can I go on like this? Her relationships, once a source of comfort, now seemed to add to her burden. Tensions ran high with her friends, who didn't fully understand the pressure she was under. She had tried to explain, to reach out for help, but no one seemed to truly grasp the depth of her struggles. Conversations once filled with laughter now carried the weight of unspoken frustrations. Her friends were busy with their own lives, and her family, though supportive, was caught in their own web of troubles. And then there was her job. The place she had once thought of as her refuge, her security. But now, it felt like a prison. Every day, she was forced to put on a mask, smiling through the tension, pretending everything was fine, even though inside she felt like she was crumbling. The fear of being laid off, the uncertainty of the future, it all gnawed at her. She could feel her sense of self-worth slipping away as her job became a constant reminder that no matter how hard she worked, it might never be enough. Each setback felt like a confirmation, a loud, harsh whisper that perhaps she wasn't strong enough to handle it all. The weight of failure clung to her like a second skin, and with every new challenge, it was as though the universe was testing her, pushing her to the brink. It wasn't just the external struggles. No, the hardest part was the battle within herself. The voice of doubt echoed louder and louder, telling her she was too weak, too small to face what lay ahead. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, there was something else. A tiny spark, flickering in the depths of her heart. It was so faint at times that Emily could barely hear it over the chaos of her life. But it was there, refusing to be extinguished. In the midst of her despair, in the darkness where everything seemed lost, this spark whispered to her, soft but steady, "You are stronger than you think." At first, Emily thought it was just a fleeting thought, a desperate hope. She dismissed it, unsure if it meant anything at all. But every time she felt like giving up, that same voice returned, like a lifeline thrown in her direction. "You are stronger than you think." It was as though the voice was trying to remind her of something she had forgotten, a truth buried deep beneath the weight of her struggles. It was a truth she had once known, but had lost sight of amid the pressure and heartache. But what did that even mean? Stronger than you think. Was she? She had never felt weaker, never felt more powerless. The world around her seemed to be conspiring against her, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to fight back. Yet, there was that voice again, persistent and quiet, like a soft beacon in the dark. "You are stronger than you think." At first, Emily didn't know how to respond to it. How could she be stronger than she thought when everything was falling apart? How could she find strength when the odds seemed so stacked against her? It didn't make sense. But still, that voice refused to go away. It was there in the quiet moments, in the early hours of the morning when she couldn't sleep, in the late nights when she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it would ever get better. "You are stronger than you think." There was something in those words, something that began to stir within her, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or maybe just the slightest shift in perspective. Maybe, just maybe, she had more strength than she realized. Maybe, she wasn't as powerless as she felt. But how could she tap into that strength? How could she stop doubting herself and start believing in the possibility of change? In the days that followed, Emily found herself wrestling with that question. She tried to push the thought away, tried to convince herself it was just wishful thinking. But every time the weight of her struggles threatened to crush her, that voice would return, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone in her fight. And so, Emily began to listen. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like it was met with 2 steps back. There were days when the doubt came crashing down on her, when the weight of her responsibilities seemed too much to bear. But every time she stumbled, every time she felt like she might give in, that spark inside her grew a little brighter. Slowly, she started to believe it. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. And with that belief, Emily began to change. She started to approach each day a little differently. She set small goals, things she knew she could manage, and each time she completed one, it felt like a small victory, a step forward. She began to take moments for herself, carving out time to breathe, to reflect, to regroup. And as she did, that tiny spark inside her grew into something more, a quiet, steady confidence that she could face whatever came her way. But the storm wasn't over. It never is. Life doesn't pause for us to catch our breath. The struggle was still there, still testing her, still pushing her to her limits. But this time, Emily wasn't facing it alone. She had that spark inside her. And with each new challenge, that spark grew brighter, until it was a steady flame. You are stronger than you think. One day, as Emily was walking home, the weight of yet another exhausting day pressing down on her, she felt the familiar exhaustion settle into her bones. Each step felt like a burden, each breath more labored than the last. Her mind was consumed by the same worries that had plagued her for weeks, her job, her family struggles, and the growing sense of helplessness that gripped her heart. The world seemed a little colder, a little more distant, and Emily wondered if she would ever find a way to break free from the chaos. It was then, as she made her way through a small park she passed every day, that she noticed an old man sitting alone on a weathered bench. His clothes were simple but clean, and his presence, though quiet, seemed to command an air of calm that stood in stark contrast to the storm inside Emily's mind. His face was marked with years of experience, and his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, seemed to hold a world of wisdom that Emily couldn't quite explain. She had no intention of stopping. She was too tired, too consumed by her own thoughts to interact with anyone. But something in the old man's gaze stopped her in her tracks. It was as though he knew exactly what she was feeling, as though he could see the heaviness in her heart and the weariness in her spirit. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of why she was drawn to him. But something nudged her forward, an unspoken curiosity that urged her to take a chance. Slowly, she approached him, her feet moving almost mechanically. The man didn't look up at first, but as she got closer, his eyes met hers with a quiet intensity. He studied her, his gaze warm but penetrating, as if he could see straight through to the core of her. Emily felt a strange mix of unease and comfort in his presence. It was as if she had stumbled upon something deeper, something that had been waiting for her, just beyond the surface of her troubled life. Without a word, the old man shifted slightly on the bench, making room for her. There was no invitation, no gesture, but somehow, Emily knew he was offering her the space to sit and talk, or perhaps, simply to listen. She sat down beside him, unsure of what to say. Her heart was still racing, her mind cluttered with 1,000 thoughts, but there was something about the peaceful stillness of the moment that made it feel safe to open up. She stared at the ground, unable to meet his gaze at first. The old man waited patiently, his presence steady, unwavering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, he spoke in a voice that was soft but carried a weight of experience. "You know," he began, his voice steady, yet filled with a quiet strength, "the strongest trees grow in the toughest of storms." Emily looked up, startled by his words. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone say something so profound. The metaphor hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, calmly, as though he knew them to be absolute truth. The winds will try to break you, he continued, his gaze never leaving hers, but they will also shape you into something unbreakable. The weight of his words hit Emily like a wave. Her thoughts froze for a moment, as if the world around her had paused. She blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Shape you into something unbreakable. For a fleeting second, she felt the spark of something inside her stir. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The winds of life had battered her, and she had tried to outrun them. She had done everything she could to protect herself from the storms, avoiding the difficult conversations, running from the challenges, masking her fears with a smile. But in that moment, as the old man's words settled into her soul, Emily realized something she hadn't considered before. She wasn't meant to escape the storm. She was meant to stand in the middle of it. The realization was a powerful one, but also terrifying. Stand in the storm? How could she? The idea of facing everything that had been weighing on her felt almost impossible. She had spent so much of her time trying to avoid confrontation, running away from her problems, but here was someone telling her that the only way through the storm was to face it head-on. Her mind raced with questions. How could she face the storms when she felt so small, so powerless? But there, nestled between the doubts, was something else, a flicker of strength, a quiet knowing that she wasn't as weak as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, she had the resilience within her to weather the storm. Maybe the very thing she had feared the most, the storm, was the key to her transformation. For the first time, Emily saw her struggles not as obstacles, but as opportunities. They weren't just burdens she had to bear. They were challenges that could reshape her, if she allowed them to. The very things that had been dragging her down could, in time, make her stronger, if she chose to stand tall in the middle of them. The old man's words lingered in the air, filling the space between them. Emily sat there, absorbing every syllable. She wasn't sure yet how she would apply these lessons to her life, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. The storm wasn't the enemy. The storm was a part of her journey. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft glow over the park, the old man rose from the bench, his movements slow but steady. He looked down at Emily, and for the first time, she saw a smile, small but knowing. "You will be all right," he said softly, as if he knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. With that, he turned and walked away, his figure gradually disappearing into the twilight. Emily watched him go, feeling a mixture of awe and gratitude. It was as though he had handed her a piece of wisdom she hadn't known she was missing. And as she sat there, alone in the quiet park, she felt something shift deep within her, a quiet determination, a sense of clarity she had been searching for. She didn't need to escape the storm. She needed to stand tall in the middle of it. And so, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would face the storms that life had thrown at her. She would no longer run from the struggles, the doubts, or the fear. She would stand strong, no matter how fierce the winds blew. The storm wouldn't break her. It would shape her. And in that process, she would become unbreakable. From that day forward, Emily made a choice. The weight of her struggles had not magically disappeared, nor had the storm around her ceased to rage. But something inside her had shifted. The old man's words had planted a seed, and now, Emily was determined to nourish it. She would not let her circumstances define her. She would no longer be the victim of her own life. From this moment on, Emily decided to reclaim her power, not by avoiding the storm, but by standing strong in its midst. It wasn't easy. It never is. Each day, the same fears tried to creep in. The doubt, the worry, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Sometimes, they felt louder than the quiet strength she was trying to build. But Emily had made a promise to herself. And this time, she wasn't going to break it. She began by focusing on what she could control. She had spent so much time trying to change things she couldn't, trying to manipulate the outcome of every situation, that she had forgotten the power that lay within her own thoughts and actions. It wasn't the external world that was keeping her down, it was her own mindset. She realized that as long as she gave the storm the power to define her, it would continue to dictate the terms of her life. Emily knew the road ahead would be long and winding. But each morning, she woke up with one goal in mind, to take control of her own mind, to take control of her own actions. No matter how small, she would take charge of what she could and let go of what she couldn't. At first, it felt awkward, almost unnatural. The habits she had formed, the constant worrying, the self-doubt, the endless negative thoughts, had been her companions for so long that it was hard to let go of them. But she kept reminding herself, every setback was a stepping stone, every failure was a lesson. It wasn't about getting everything right, it was about showing up every day, even when it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when the fear almost drowned her, when the weight of the responsibility she felt for her family and her job threatened to crush her. On those days, it wasn't about taking giant leaps, it was about taking the smallest steps. Sometimes, it was as simple as getting out of bed and facing the day. Other times, it was taking a deep breath and refusing to let the fear control her. There were moments when all she could do was put one foot in front of the other, even if it felt like an exhausting, impossible task. But she kept moving forward. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't as if one morning she woke up and everything was magically better. There were days when the darkness felt overwhelming, and it seemed like her progress had been undone by a single setback. But each time she fell, she picked herself up. Each time she stumbled, she dusted herself off. And with each small victory, she began to believe more and more that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She started to develop new routines. She began to wake up earlier in the mornings, carving out a few moments of quiet before the chaos of the day began. She meditated, even if it was only for 5 minutes, and let the calmness settle into her mind. She read, not to escape, but to learn and grow. Slowly, she began to replace the negative thoughts with affirmations. She told herself, "I am strong enough. I am worthy of success. I can handle whatever comes my way." At first, the words felt hollow. They didn't seem to match the reality of her life. But over time, as she repeated them to herself day after day, they began to sink in. The more she affirmed her own strength, the more she began to see it. Her mindset started to shift from one of defeat to one of possibility. And, slowly, Emily began to realize that the power to change her life had always been within her. It was never in the things she couldn't control. As she focused on her own actions, Emily also started to take better care of herself. She had spent so long pouring herself into her work, into her family, into everyone and everything around her, that she had forgotten the importance of taking care of her own well-being. Now, she made sure to carve out time for herself, even if it was just a quiet walk in the park or an hour to enjoy a good book. She learned to say no when she needed to protect her energy, and to prioritize her own needs without guilt. But the most powerful shift came when she started viewing each obstacle as an opportunity. Every setback, every challenge, was no longer a sign of her failure. It was a chance to learn, to grow, and to become stronger. She began to approach each problem with a different mindset. What can I learn from this? How can this make me better? And with that shift, Emily began to feel a sense of empowerment she had never known before. Her relationships, too, began to change. As Emily learned to take control of her own life, she also learned to communicate more honestly and openly with those around her. The tension in her friendships began to ease, as she set boundaries and spoke her truth. She found herself surrounded by people who supported her growth, rather than draining her energy. The more she embraced her own strength, the more she attracted people who encouraged her, who believed in her, and who reminded her that she was not alone in her journey. The hardest days still came. There were still moments when the world felt too heavy, when the weight of her responsibilities threatened to overwhelm her. But even on those days, Emily found a way to push through. She didn't expect perfection from herself anymore. She knew that sometimes it was enough just to keep going, to take that one small step forward, no matter how hard it seemed. In the quiet moments of reflection, Emily realized that she had come a long way. She wasn't the same person she had been when the storm first hit. She was no longer someone who waited for the world to change. She was someone who created change in her own life. She had learned that strength wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about facing them with courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that, no matter how difficult the journey, she was strong enough to overcome it. As Emily kept going, something remarkable started to happen. Things began to change, slowly at first, but undeniably. The world that once felt so heavy and unyielding began to open up before her in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, Emily saw a glimmer of possibility where she had once seen only roadblocks. The overwhelming problems that had seemed insurmountable now appeared less daunting, and she found herself thinking, what if I could find a way through this? It wasn't magic. It wasn't an instant fix. But Emily had changed on the inside, and that shift in her mindset began to transform the way she viewed the world around her. Every challenge, every setback, no longer felt like an immovable wall. Instead, she started to view them as opportunities to grow, to learn, and to test her newfound strength. Problems became puzzles to solve, not burdens to bear. For years, Emily had kept her struggles to herself, too proud to ask for help. She had convinced herself that asking for assistance was a sign of weakness, that she had to do everything on her own. But now, as her confidence grew, so did her humility. She realized she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. There were people who cared about her, people who wanted to help, if only she would let them. So, one by one, she reached out. She called old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. She sent messages to colleagues she had once kept at arm's length, afraid to seem vulnerable. To her surprise, the people she had distanced herself from didn't judge her. Instead, they offered support, advice, and encouragement. Emily realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of failure. It was a demonstration of courage, of strength. It was a recognition that no one was meant to go through life's struggles alone. She had always been there for others, but now, she was allowing herself to be supported. The walls she had built around herself were slowly starting to crumble, and in their place, a new sense of community began to form. As her relationships began to heal, something even more extraordinary began to unfold. The stronger Emily became, the more life around her seemed to shift. It was as though the energy she was putting into herself and her growth was reverberating outward, touching everything she interacted with. At work, Emily started to see opportunities where she once saw only obstacles. The confidence that had been steadily growing within her began to reflect in her actions. She started taking on new projects at work, speaking up in meetings, and offering her ideas with a clarity and conviction she hadn't known she had. Her bosses noticed, and her colleagues, who once saw her as timid and uncertain, now saw someone who was reliable, capable, and ready to lead. Her career, which had once felt like an endless cycle of stress and uncertainty, began to take a turn for the better. What was once a source of dread and anxiety became a place of growth and possibility. Emily no longer saw her job as a burden to bear. It had become a platform for her to share her talents and her ideas. And with each new step she took, her confidence grew. She was no longer waiting for opportunities to find her. She was creating them. But the most surprising transformation wasn't just in her career. It was in the people around her. As Emily found herself becoming stronger, more grounded, and more confident, others started to take notice. People who had once been distant or even critical now sought her out for advice, for guidance, for support. Her friends and family, who had witnessed her struggles, began to turn to her when they faced challenges of their own. Emily found herself becoming a source of strength for others, a beacon of light in their times of darkness. The woman who had once felt so lost, so powerless, was now the one offering wisdom, lending a helping hand, and encouraging others to keep going, just as she had learned to do. It was a humbling experience for her. She had never imagined that the very strength she had struggled so long to find could be a gift to those around her. Her relationships deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. With her newfound sense of self, Emily was able to be more present, more patient, and more compassionate in her interactions. Her family, who had once felt like a source of stress and responsibility, now became a support system, a source of love and connection. The strain between her and her friends lifted, and she found herself surrounded by people who shared her values, who encouraged her, and who celebrated her growth. And in the quiet moments, when Emily reflected on the changes in her life, she realized something extraordinary. Her transformation hadn't been about changing the world around her. It had been about changing the way she saw herself. The storm hadn't disappeared, it never would. But Emily had learned how to navigate it, to find peace in the chaos. She had learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding the storm. It was about standing firm in the face of it, trusting in her own ability to weather whatever came her way. The unexpected transformation Emily had experienced wasn't just about achieving success or overcoming obstacles. It was about discovering that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. She had spent so much time feeling powerless, trapped by the weight of her struggles, but now she saw the truth. The power to change her life had always been within her. It had been there all along, buried beneath the layers of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. And once she had unlocked it, once she had learned to trust in herself, everything around her began to shift. Emily was no longer waiting for the world to change. She was the one creating change. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected transformation of all. Emily's story teaches us something powerful, something that resonates deep within all of us. Strength isn't about never falling. It's not about living a life free from pain, setbacks, or heartache. No, true strength lies in something far more profound. It's about getting back up every time we fall. It's about the resilience to rise again, even when the world seems to be pushing us down. The storms will come, of that we can be certain. There will be times when we are knocked to the ground, when we feel helpless, and when it seems like the weight of the world is too much to bear. But strength is not measured by how many times we stand tall without faltering. It's measured by how many times we can pick ourselves up and keep moving forward. For Emily, the journey wasn't about avoiding the pain. It wasn't about running from the difficult moments or wishing them away. No, the real turning point for her was when she began to accept that life would never be smooth sailing. There would always be storms. And in those storms, there would be both fear and opportunity. The question wasn't whether or not the storms would come, it was whether she would have the courage to face them head-on. It's easy to think of strength as something that happens in the absence of struggle. We often look at successful people, those who seem to have it all together, and think they must have figured out how to avoid hardship. We convince ourselves that if we just work hard enough, if we do everything right, we can bypass the challenges that threaten to shake us. But the truth is, no one can escape the storms. No one. They are inevitable. But what we can do, what Emily learned to do, is choose how we respond when they arrive. Life is full of challenges. Sometimes, it feels like they come in waves, each one bigger and harder than the last. We face personal loss, financial struggles, relationship breakdowns, or health crises. We find ourselves questioning our abilities, wondering if we are strong enough to make it through. But Emily's story reminds us that our strength doesn't come from avoiding these challenges. It comes from how we face them. How we choose to stand up, time and time again, even when it feels like the world is conspiring against us. What Emily found, what she learned from every setback and every painful moment, is that strength is not about fighting against the storm. It's about learning how to weather it. When the wind howls and the rain pours down, the tree doesn't try to run away or hide. It bends with the wind. It braces itself, standing firm, rooted in the knowledge that the storm will eventually pass. And when it does, the tree stands even taller, its roots deeper, its bark stronger. That's what Emily discovered about herself. She had spent so much time trying to avoid the pain, trying to escape the things that made her feel vulnerable. But in the process, she had neglected to see the value of the struggle. The things that had once felt like burdens were actually the very things that helped her grow. Every obstacle became a lesson, every challenge a stepping stone. She learned that the more she faced, the stronger she became. Not because the struggle was easy, but because she allowed herself to grow through it, not in spite of it. Her growth wasn't immediate. It wasn't something that happened overnight. There were days when she felt just as defeated as she had before. There were moments when she wondered if all her hard work, all her new habits and changes, were really making a difference. But the key to Emily's journey wasn't in the absence of struggle. It was in her ability to stay in the fight, to keep moving forward when the path wasn't clear. She learned that there's strength in persistence, strength in resilience. Even when the world seemed to be crashing down around her, she refused to stay down. She refused to let her circumstances define her. The lesson here, the lesson that Emily's story teaches all of us, is that we are capable of far more than we give ourselves credit for. We all have the resilience within us to face life's hardest moments. The storms will test us, yes. They will shake us to our core. But if we can remember that strength is not about avoiding the pain, but about how we rise from it, we can endure whatever life throws our way. Emily found her strength not by avoiding difficulty, but by embracing it. She learned that difficulty is not something to be feared, it is something to be embraced as part of the process of transformation. The stronger we become in the face of hardship, the more resilient we are, not just to external challenges, but to the internal ones, too, the doubts, the fears, the voices that try to convince us we are not enough. We can prove them wrong, not by denying our vulnerability, but by accepting it and using it as a stepping stone to become the person we were always meant to be. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all, that the storm doesn't have to break us. It can make us. It can shape us into the people we are capable of becoming. But only if we let it. Only if we choose to stand tall in the face of it, trusting that, no matter how fierce the wind or how heavy the rain, we are stronger than we think. So, the next time life knocks you down, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear, remember Emily's story. It's a story of resilience, of learning to stand tall in the face of adversity, and most importantly, of discovering the strength within ourselves that we often forget exists. Life will test you, there's no denying that. It will throw obstacles, storms, and challenges your way. At times, it will feel like everything is falling apart, and the winds of doubt and fear will try to knock you down. But just like Emily, you have something within you that is capable of turning even the darkest moments into a source of light. The winds will blow. The storms will come. But it is in how you respond to them that your true strength is revealed. Just like Emily, you can rise, stronger than you were before. You can choose to face the storm, to stand firm, and to grow through the challenges, rather than be defeated by them. Every struggle is an opportunity to build your resilience, to become the person you are meant to be. And while it may not always be easy, remember, you are stronger than you think. Life is full of challenges, but each challenge you face is another step in your journey of becoming unbreakable. When you learn to embrace the storms, you start to realize that they aren't just obstacles. They are the very things that shape you into someone who can overcome anything. You are more capable than you know. So, when life knocks you down, don't stay down. Get back up. Stand tall. And keep moving forward. Just like Emily did. Remember, your strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from having the courage to rise each time you do. If you found Emily's journey inspiring and you're ready to start your own, to face your own storms with confidence and courage, know that you are not alone. Every day is a new chance to take one step closer to the person you are meant to be. The storms will come, but so will your strength. And if you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more life-changing lessons like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay connected with us for more motivational stories, personal growth tips, and inspiring content that will help you rise above the challenges of life. Let's face the storms together, stronger than ever before. Don't forget to like and share this story with anyone who might need a reminder of their inner strength. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories that could change your life. Keep pushing forward, and remember, you're stronger than you think.